Welcome to a very special edition of About Books. I'm sitting here in the heart of Liverpool in Cavern Walks with the author of an amazing book about, who else? The Beatles, David Bedford. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And can I congratulate you? The Fab 104. I'm guessing I've read about 104 books on the Beatles, but this truly stands out. Can we kick off by tell me what it's about? Tell me what the premise is behind the book.
It's a simple one. In my first book, Liverpool, somebody had asked me the question, well, how did they go from being the Quarrymen to the Beatles? I said, oh, it's nice and simple. Then realised it wasn't nice and simple. And I spent a while just putting a very basic chapter in that book together, which just went through the first lineup of the Quarrymen and how it all changed and how they got to Ringo joining and the Fab Four complete. But there was a lot of interest in that one chapter, and I thought there's more of a story here. So that then became the Fab 104, and the 104 refers to the number of people in the story. What I decided to choose was those members of the group, so from John's first lineup all the way through, but then any other group that the lads were in. Then I thought, now there's more of a story here, because in those early days, lots of other people played in the band, maybe just for one night or 2 or 3 nights or something like that. But then, because I sort of got into the Beatles, because I picked a guitar up when I was about 10 years old, I thought, I wouldn't be playing guitar without 2 good mates of mine who taught me. And I came across a guy called Ian James, who I found out taught Paul to play guitar, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go a stage back and try and find all the people who taught them to play as well. And the number just kept growing. And it is a coincidence that it ended at 104. So I thought, well, you've got Fab 4, you've got Fab 104. But it did literally, it just kept going up and up and up as I found more and more people. So just in that period of 1956 to 1962, there's 104 people who I say have an important part to play in the evolution of the Beatles.
If I can take you back to the start, I was interested to see in the intro to the book that you were born in 1965. So doing the math on that, that should really make you a punk rocker rather than a Mersey beater. How did it all begin for you? How did you get into what I imagine is a real fascination with the Fab Four?
It's down to playing guitar. The very first songbook I got bought was The Beatles Complete. And because I'd grown up in the Dingle, so from the age of 4 in September 1969, I went to St Silas School, which was the school that Ringo Starr had gone to. So I lived in the Dingle until I was 24.
Did they celebrate the fact that St Silas by then, was it his picture up over the entryway or something?
No, and it's a bit like I think Liverpool was in the 70s. All right, the Beatles had left, they'd done, and there's more important things going on in the economy. But I was aware of the fact I was at the school that Ringo Starr had been to. So, growing up with that all around me, when I got married in 1987, first house we lived in was a couple of streets away from Admiral Grove, where Ringo had grown up. The house I grew up in, literally you came around to the back gate at the bottom of Madryn Street, where Ringo was born. My oldest friend, who makes me like 5 years old, lived almost opposite where Ringo was born. So I had all that around me. Then my wife and I, we moved out to Mossley Hill, close to a road you may have heard of called Penny Lane. And then we had 3 daughters. All of them went to Dovedale School, which is where John Lennon and George Harrison went. And so when I started getting involved with the children's school, the whole Beatles thing was coming back to me. So I was still playing guitar. And it was the music. So even though, I could have been a punk rocker, I was actually more into ska and madness and all that kind of stuff. But it was the roots of the Liverpool music, that sound, always fascinated me. And so I'd always grown up with the Beatles music all around me.
Beatles books have been around really since 1963, 64. How do you think they've evolved down the years? I mean, going right back to Michael Braun's Beatles Progress, Love Me Do, and Billy Shepherd's The True Story. And then there was Derek Taylor's ghosting for Brian Epstein, Cellar Full of Noise. How do you feel they've evolved down the years?
I think when you go back to the early ones, I've recently been going back to all the original issues of the Beatles book monthly. And when you start following the stories through there, there's some amazing little interviews in there which people quite often miss. And of course, True Story of the Beatles sort of followed from that. And there's some nice interviews. But I think what we always found, and it's the same when eventually the Beatles brought their Beatles anthology out, it was the Beatles' history as the Beatles want you to know it, which isn't always the same as what the real history is. And I think what we found, certainly in the books that came out while they were still the Beatles, obviously Hunter Davies' biography is the obvious one, that was still the cosy version, the cuddly Fab Four.
The company version.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There was none of the, I heard John say, there's pictures of me crawling around on my knees when I was at the whorehouse in Amsterdam. That didn't sort of come out in '64. What we found is now you've got one version of the history. People are now starting to analyse things in a lot finer detail. And certainly for someone like me, because I was too young to have witnessed the Beatles, it was, can I go back and find the people who were there and see what the real stories were on the ground, particularly here in Liverpool.
This isn't your first book, though.
No, it's my second book. My first book was at Liverpool, birthplace of the Beatles. And for some reason, there'd never been a Beatles book just about Liverpool. And I started that back in 2000. I was signed off work, had an illness. They weren't sure what it was. In the end, I never went back to work. I've got a condition called fibromyalgia and a few other bits and bobs. And my doctor said, what are you interested in? Find something to do. Which was a fatal mistake. So effectively, my GP prescribed the Beatles as my therapy.
Had you written before? I mean,
No.
No? All right.
No, I'd never done much. I'd done a newsletter thing at school, which I'd started, contributed a bit to a church magazine, but I'd never properly done. And I didn't intend to write a book. The plan was just to find out about all the Beatles places around where I lived. And my main thing was I'm a keen photographer. I'll go and photograph a few of these places and just put something together. And it might be one of these little self-published books. And that would be it. But as you say, hundreds of books. I've got a room full of them. And you start reading these books about the Beatles, about Liverpool, most of the time by people who've never been here, who don't understand the city. And so the tagline on my book was, to understand the Beatles, you've got to understand Liverpool. And I thought, okay, if all these people are getting it wrong, I want to put it right. So I started then going and finding the people who were there at the start, and this little idea started in 2000, and it took me 9 years to finish the book.
With the Fab 104, how did you go about getting it commissioned? What came first? Did you write the book first and send it around publishers, or what was the route you took?
Well, thankfully with this one, because I got a publishing deal for Liverpool, and again, I didn't go seeking publishers. There's a friend of mine runs Beatles tours, and if there's somebody interesting coming up, he gives me a ring, says, do you want to meet them? And there was a guy called Marshall Terrell over in America, and he came over to do some research to write about the Beatles and Liverpool. So I said, no, I'll come along and meet him. So we spent the day together going around, and I was telling him a few of the stories, stuff I'd found out, and he said, I've been writing about the Beatles for 20 years, I didn't know half of what you've just told me. I said, well, I've been putting this little book thing together for a few years. So he said, send me a chapter. So I did. And he sent it to his publisher, who rang me and offered me the deal. And so Liverpool was published. And so when I said, I've got this idea for follow-up, he said, okay, go and do it. So I did.
Can you tell me something about the long and winding road of actually writing and editing the book?
Yeah, the bit I love particularly is research. I love being a historian. I've always loved history. I've always been a fan of particularly Sherlock Holmes, but all the detective stories as well. And so it sort of combined my love of history with my love of detective stories. And starting with maybe a comment, maybe a line that somebody's done in an interview, and just following that. And so you end up following the trail of evidence and seeing where, and sometimes it's amazing what turns up. And so then it's how do you then transfer that to make it readable? Because, for example, there's one of the stories in there, and the very first colour photo of the Quarrymen, we've got John, Paul and George standing there with these wonderful quiffs, and up against the wall is a guy with a half pint of Guinness. So I thought, who's the guy with the half pint of Guinness? So I went off and I found him.
Is he well?
He's doing fine, and he still likes his half pint. And I bought him a couple, good old Dennis. And I had a lovely chat with him, and it turns out he was best friends with Paul McCartney's cousin. He had a better guitar than John, Paul and George did, so he used to sit in with them sometimes and play with them, and they borrowed his guitar. I thought, wow, what a great story. And I think that we sort of know quite a lot about John, Paul, George and Ringo, and we certainly know what happened after they became famous. But it's all these people who nobody knows much about. I like to give them their little bit of credit. And so really I like to write the human story, which then, it just becomes natural.
Let's go right back to the start for the Beatles.
Yeah.
Bombs are raining down on this beautiful city of ours. How much of an influence do you think that had growing up in that period? Or being born into that period, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, firstly, the Beatles could only have come from Liverpool. There's something so unique about the city, the cosmopolitan mix, the cultural influences here that you don't get anywhere else. I think it is very much a story of the war as well. When you realise what the city went through, particularly when you even just look at the May Blitz, you think how many houses were wiped out, how many people died. The fact of the battle for the Atlantic was here. And then each part of the Beatles family has some kind of involvement with the war. You know, think how much it affected John, with his dad being in the Merchant Navy, not being around. So not having that stable family life there. And I think when you grow up in a city that has been battered like that, that's got to affect you. And I still remember, again, I've heard the interviews that Ringo's given of growing up in the Dingle. You still go down by those Welsh streets, and some of them, half the streets wiped out because it was wiped out by a bomb. But as kids, you go and play in the bombing.
And then into that comes the birth of skiffle and rock and roll. Just at the right time to grab the attention of John, Paul, George and Ringo and Pete.
Yeah, but and all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the first lineup of the Quarrymen, one of the guys who's virtually never been interviewed is Bill Smith. Now, Bill, with John and Pete Shotton, founded the Quarrymen at Quarrybank Schools. He was the first T-chess bass player. And you think, he's got a great story to tell, because he was only with them for a short time. When his exam results weren't going too well, a bit of parental pressure, he decided to pack it in. And so John Lennon, Pete Shotton, went to Bill's house, broke in, stole the T-chess bass, took it back to Pete's house. So Bill went to Pete's house, broke in, stole the T-chess bass and took it home again. And you think, these were the lads. And
everyday life in Liverpool.
Exactly. And the fun of skiffle was that, Elvis had happened, Little Richard had happened. It's amazing rock and roll from America. But for the lads here, it was something to admire, something to enjoy, but it was inaccessible. Lonnie Donegan comes along and basically says, you can half learn 3 chords. Here's a whole list of songs you can sing. And suddenly music was accessible for anybody, no matter what your talent was. And the guys in the Quarrymen would tell you at that time, there wasn't a lot of talent, but it wasn't about that, it was about fun. And it was singing these ridiculously stupid songs about how great it was to be on the American Railroad.
Yeah.
What the kids in Liverpool know about that? It didn't matter. It was fun music, and it grabbed this new breed of teenager.
So how important were the Quarrymen long term?
Essential, because could the Quarrymen have become famous? Well, they did. By then they were the Beatles. But you can't have one without the other, and that's what the book is about. That's why I call it the evolution. It wasn't one group, then that group folds, then you put another group together. There's this continuity from the very, very start all the way through. And as with most bands, musicians come and they go. But this was an evolution.
Evolution, it's a very good word.
And I think that's the perfect one. So
Yeah.
the Quarrymen did become famous.
Yeah.
Just by the time they did, they were the Beatles.
And they are still playing to this
They
day.
are, and they're brilliant.
And the word joy, I think, can still be connected to them. There was a family feel to the Quarrymen, isn't there? The way members came and went, and
Yeah, because it was all about friendship groups.
yeah,
And it's who knew who could get everybody else into the group.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. It was friends having fun together.
and then Merseybeat happens. Where would you put that historically? Where does it start? Where does it end, if it ever does end? Where can you put that into some context historically?
Historically, again, it was an evolution, and I think as probably all the Merseybeaters, the Beatles and stuff would agree, it was taking American music, putting a Liverpool twang on it, and then selling it back to the Americans. Because that's what the influence, that's what the heart of Merseybeat was. Because you look at the set lists for all the bands, it was virtually all about playing the great American songs. And it wasn't, the Beatles think, maybe they were just a rock and roll band. They weren't. A lot of it was R&B. They were very, very influenced by what was going on in America. They're looking at blues, I'd say the R&B. A lot of the black singers, they're really inspired.
Country as well, yeah.
Well, see, we look at the first Quarrymen business card, skiffle, country, rock and roll. Country was at the roots of it, and Liverpool had this amazing country and western scene, bigger than anything anywhere else in Britain, possibly in Europe. It was huge. So you've got all the jazz was still going. You've got all these music scenes happening. Each were evolving and going their own way. But I think probably the key moment in the Merseybeat scene, as it were, was when the Beatles came back from Hamburg the first time, 27th of December 1960 at Little Town Hall, and they'd been squeezed onto the bill, and all the other groups were there, as normal, with their nice suits and their ties, get ready to do all their songs, and the curtains open, and there's this scruffy bunch, bedraggled, long hair, leather, everything turned up loud, and they blast into Long Tall Sally. Nobody had seen anything like that before. And I think it just took the local music scene to another level.
So the Quarrymen, the Johnny and the Moondogs, Silver Beatles, the Beatles, how were they viewed? By the time they got back and were playing after Hamburg, how were they viewed by the other bands, the other groups, promoters, managers across Merseyside? Were they recognised at that point as something special, something above all else?
Absolutely. That performance at Little Town Hall, I was talking to Dave Forshaw, who was one of the big promoters in the North End of Liverpool. Now, he was only about 18 or 19 years of age, and he was a friend of Brian Kelly, who had promoted that night. He got into the dressing room because he knew he'd seen something different, and he booked the Beatles up as much as he could. Then you got Sam Leach, then we in the 61 as well. All these promoters wanting the Beatles because wherever they went, they brought a crowd with them. You guaranteed you'd get a sellout. And so suddenly they were the top dogs. When you consider, if you go back even just 6 months, when they went to Hamburg the first time in August 1960, they'd only just decided to call themselves the Beatles. They'd gone through a series of drummers. We got Pete Best just before they went. they had no real reputation in Liverpool. So, but they come back after playing these hours and hours in Hamburg. Nobody's seen anything like them. They blew everybody else away, and they set a new standard.
Looking at the Fab 104, all the people connected to them, can you name maybe 2 or 3 who, without him, they wouldn't have made that breakthrough?
First of all, I have to say Pete Best as drummer. They knew him from the Casbah Club. They grabbed him last minute to go off to Hamburg. And I know from speaking to so many either fans or musicians at the time, that early sound of 61 and 62, so much of it was the backbeat that Pete was laying down. This amazing sound that they generated, his atom beat, this thumping 4 in the bar, that brought them to the attention of everybody. They couldn't have done it without Pete. But that still only made them kings of Liverpool. But getting a record deal, you couldn't just do from being around Liverpool. Everything was centred in London. All of the media was there, including the record companies. The guy without whom nothing would have happened, of course, is Brian Epstein. He had his big record store at Nems. He knew the record business inside out. He wasn't particularly a pop music fan, but he was a good businessman, a very good salesman, and he could spot a saleable commodity. And he'd started writing for Mersey Beat, which had launched in the July of 61. He was doing record reviews. When people started asking for My Bonnie, which the Beatles had recorded with Tony Sheridan out in Hamburg in the June, he was intrigued. And obviously you find it's recorded under the name of Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers on the Polydor label out in Germany. And Brian had always claimed if you ordered a record, he'd get it. So he got, I don't know, 25 copies. And he advertised them for sale, and they sold out straight away. So the others, another 50, they sold out straight away. So now he was reading about them in Mersey Beat. He had these kids coming in and asking for the records. And he's thinking, okay, who are they? Bill Harry arranges for him to go down to the Cavern. And he goes down one lunchtime with his assistant, Alistair Taylor. And I interviewed Alistair years ago. Fascinating character. And he said, they looked a bit odd down there. Of course, Brian was always smartly dressed. And the Beatles were on, and there was just this horrendous noise bashing off all the cavern walls. He said it wasn't the music that either of them liked. He said, but you couldn't help being absorbed by what was going on.
David, thank you. Please keep writing, because I'm delighted that the story continues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.